to another one of our Tuesday lunch seminar calls. And it's a great pleasure today to have with us a big team from the KSR project, No Systemic Racism. And I remember this pretty vividly when in September 2020, in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, Felicia Smith, the inaugural racial justice and social equity librarian at Stanford, created in the Stanford libraries the Say Their Names, No More Names exhibit, which asked viewers to know justice, know, and there was this important and massive, monumental and memorable banner placed at the library at that point. So out of that exhibit, Felicia then launched the No Systemic Racism project, which is data intensive as an endeavor and putting information literacy, the hallmark of library work and mission, to work for both keeping memory of racial injustice, but at the same time, creating knowledge to affect change for a more peaceful existence for all of us. So KSR, as the project is now well known, has grown immensely since then, and it has involved more and more people, establishing really innovative also for Stanford collaborations with students at Stanford, but also in community colleges and other institutions nearby, as well as instituting new frames for what we imagine the library work to be for, knowledge formations, and also new ways to create knowledge in relationship to the community and the ties that they bind us all. So this is very exciting and transformative work in digital humanities and data science and library science. And I will now pass the podium and the word to Nicole Coleman, who has been a long time collaborator of CESTA as a digital research architect in the libraries, but also the co-founder and research director of the Humanities Plus Design Lab, which is one of the foundational CESTA labs. So Nicole will introduce this work and the community that is in this room that's been engaged.
Thank you, Giovanna.
Thank you.
And thank you, SESTA. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, SESTA, for hosting us and being such a wonderful host to this project, and specifically to the work that we've done with our undergraduate research assistants. So this has been absolutely fantastic. So unfortunately, my dear collaborator and the lead of this project, Felicia Smith, cannot be here today. She is not feeling well, but she wishes she could be here, and she's here on Zoom and may or may not interject at some point. I wanted to not try to speak for Felicia, but just I'll read a little bit from what Felicia's written about the No Systemic Racism project. So she wrote that in September 2020, in response to the global Black Lives Matter movement and drawing on the aforementioned slogan, "No justice, no peace, no racist police," several libraries created the Say Their Names, No More Names exhibit that asks viewers to no justice, no peace, as Giovanna said in introducing, and here's this banner that has until recently been on our library, Green Library. Felicia says, as librarians, we are all committed to information literacy, which plays an essential role in society's progress toward a more peaceful existence. Libraries are uniquely qualified to disseminate knowledge to information seekers who will be empowered to build a more just community. However, as an African-American librarian, I feel the awesome responsibility of being keeper of the light and protector of our shared memories. I believe that before we as a society can, quote, know justice, we must interrogate the racial injustices and atone for the destruction caused by white supremacy before we can ever know peace. So that's just the beginning You can read this piece that's posted on the library's website, written by Felicia. But I'm sorry, Felicia couldn't be here with us. She is not only the lead and the visionary for the project, but absolutely kind of the shining light and joy for all of us on this project. So before I move on, I wanted to explain this title that we have. So was the police killing of Oscar Grant justified? How do we change the question? So last summer here at SESTA, there was we worked with a group of students, as Giovanna mentioned, who were working at Foothill and De Anza colleges. Alex, who we'll introduce later, is here today, and is one of those students who's continued to work with us on this project. But one of the students in that internship program brought up the killing of Oscar Grant by BART police in 2009. Though she's an immigrant from Jamaica and not a naturalized citizen, she said she thinks of herself as an American. The shootings of unarmed young Black men were then, very, very personal for her, because she and her older brother were still new to this country when Trayvon Martin was killed. She knew it could too easily happen to her brother. So she approached the KSR project with a question. She says, what do you know about Oscar Grant? What do any of us know about Oscar Grant? And so as we in that project, together sort of tried to piece together his knowledge of Oscar Grant's life, we were looking, of course, mostly through the lens of his shooting by police at the Fruitvale station in Oakland. And in that process, another one of the student interns asked, was the shooting justified? And listening to that question, realizing that many people would ask and surely have posed the same question, really catalyzed the project that summer around how we might encourage people to ask other questions. Like, what is justifiable use of force by law enforcement? How is that determined and governed? Did you know that your police department invests in the training and deployment of military equipment? Do you know how its use is justified? What kind of systemic forces and influences in Oscar Grant's life correlate with the circumstances of his death? Our subsequent work with students in the Anthro 162B, and it's dual listed Anthro and Africam. Of course, digital traces, which Felicia Smith and I taught with my colleague who's here, Claudia Engel. That digital traces class sort of expanded the Say Their Names exhibit to explore ways to encourage Stanford students to know, KNOW, know more names of Stanford students, faculty, and staff who fought racism at Stanford and built a Black community here. So with that, that's a sort of introduction to the grounding of this. Okay, so we're going to have 4 different presentations today, and we wanted to be clear to frame these as explorations in communicating systemic racism. In other words, we know very well that that this is an awesome task, as Felicia said, and we don't have the answers. And not only that, we're only we're only moving, have moved a small part in the direction of Felicia's larger vision, which is really to understand the complexity and the connectiveness of all of these different factors. You're going to see a lot of focus on policing and police policy, and I think Felicia would want to make it clear that that is not the only focus of this No Systemic Racism project. It's just a start, but it's a way for us to start thinking about solutions. So the first presentation, gathering missing data sets, focusing on California law enforcement agency policy manuals, that was to be presented by Disha Shidam, who was at Foothill De Anza College in the class of 24. Disha couldn't be with us today, so I will do a brief introduction of her project. And then we'll move on to visualizing data about the militarization of police, challenges to use of force policy, and regulating the accumulation of military surplus weapons, armor, and surveillance. That's going to be presented by Mahogany Brown, class of 24 here at Stanford, and Tracy Wade, class of 26 here at Stanford. Tracy is our current SESTA intern. Can a data story help humanize the harm? That's placing Oscar Grant's killing by police in a context of systems of discrimination. So this is where we decided to focus in on one life, but really place that in the larger context. So that's going to be presented by Akostia Kisi, Stanford 23, Cosmo 23. So yay, Akostia. And Thalia Revia from Stanford class of 24. And then, the next one, Stanford Archives as Data. We've actually changed the title a few times on this. I think on the side it'll actually say asking questions of Black at Stanford, which is not an archive per se, but Black at Stanford is an exhibit on the Stanford Library website that brings together materials from a number of different archives on campus, University Archives. So this is engaging with the history of Black activism and community building at Stanford through the archives. And that work will be presented by Chanhan Zuzo. Was that pretty close? This is our different, he allows me to call him Alex, and another name. Alex is here with us from Foothill Kansas College, class of 25. All right, and with that, I'm going to try to put on my Disha Shidam hat. So this first presentation, or the first kind of section of work was we were looking at policy manuals and the police policy manuals specifically in California. And I should have said before that most all of this work is focused only within California. And the reason for that is that the No Systemic Racism Project was meant to be something that could be modeled and maybe reproduced in other states, knowing that to try to do this even for one state is already an awesome task. So in the early days of this work, long before I was involved in the project, Felicia and our other colleagues in the library did a series of interviews with community members, folks, from Stanford, and one of whom was Judge Ladoris Hazard Cordell, who is currently retired. And Judge Cordell said specifically about police policy manuals. So these are manuals that explain what police are allowed to do, what they're supposed to do in their interactions with the community. Collecting these materials serves an important role in creating an informed populace. When civilians know what's allowed by police policies, they're armed with the knowledge to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their community by fighting back against abuse. People must know their rights in order to identify when their rights are being violated. So early on in the project, this California bill, SB 978, actually went into effect. So it was approved by Governor, I think was it Jerry Brown, maybe at the time, in 2018, but took effect in January 1st, 2020. And it requires the Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training. So basically that's like, these are post-affiliated law enforcement agencies. It's pretty much every law enforcement, police department, sheriff's department, and so forth that you could imagine. And each local law enforcement agency to conspicuously post on their internet websites all the current standards, policies, practices, operating procedures, and education and training materials that would otherwise be available to the public if a request was made pursuant to California Public Records Act. So they should make it public, they should make it easy. Sounds good as a law, very, very difficult actually, or I mean, it seems as if, it seemed to us as if these law enforcement agencies were able to, let's say, evade this to some degree. So we were partnering with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, this is a group that was instrumental in getting SB 978 passed. They worked with Senator Bradford to get that passed because they knew the importance of making these materials public. But what we found is that we had to spend a lot of time placing requests to contact the law enforcement. It's not being posted, it's not been posted. So this is part of the data collection process started really with that. But that wasn't just that wasn't the most difficult part of it, because we sort of decided, okay, we're going to focus on those the policy manuals that we can have, that we can get access to, and then what can we do with them? You would think that sort of logical place to start is just to sort of scrape all of these websites. So we had to come up with a list of websites for all of the law enforcement agencies. And a big part of that, and I see it because you're nodding, because you worked a lot on this. Pretty much almost everyone on the team worked on almost everything that we're going to be presenting today to some degree. But this was particularly difficult because the websites change frequently, have changed frequently. So tracking this stuff down and figuring out their file systems was really, really challenging. Also, just figuring out which are post-participating and which are not, things like that. That's something that also, believe it or not, is sort of subject to change. So which, are required to post this material and which are not. And then, so we had to come up with this list, and then we had to actually gather the documents. So the first effort was just a big crawl of all of these different websites. And what we ended up with out of like about approximately 450 different law enforcement agencies, more than 8,000 documents. So a lot of that stuff was stuff we needed to go through and get rid of. But the other part of that was challenging is that a lot of these materials, I just shared one example. This is from California, a police department, LA Police Department. And this is an example of kind of how these materials are shared. Sometimes they're in multiple different documents. They make it very, very difficult. It's not as if you can just go and grab a single document that's the policy manual. And not only that, in many cases, even though these are born digital documents, they're not OCR. So a lot of DSHA's work has been figuring out and fine-tuning OCR models on this material, so we could get a full text. And then that's the final image there to the right is showing like just producing a text corpus of this material. So then we can start to mine it, do some interesting things with it. And when I say interesting things, so our partners in this project, and I'm turn this over in a moment, but this is appropriate because George Brown is executive director of the Center for Racial Justice, and they've partnered with us on a number of these efforts. And one is these policy manuals, because one of the core policy manuals is the use of force policy. And the Center for Racial Justice here at Stanford Law School has been focused on developing their own model use of force policy that's more about protecting individuals rather than just focus on protecting the police. But one of the things that they shared with us and have helped instruct us on is the ways in which the language in here is very complex. The notions of reasonableness, what would a reasonable officer do? There's a lot of ambiguity, or it leaves room for a lot of ambiguity and interpretation. Which makes this a really, really rich corpus for investigation. So that's first project. And now I'm going to turn this over to Mahogany.
Hey, hello guys. I will be talking about the visualization of militarization of police. And to start off, I will be using a quote from the SED collaborator from earlier, which says it's very difficult for community groups, civilians, and even local government officials to engage in a detailed dialogue on equal footing with their local police agencies about how to change and improve local use of force policies. So with this, we're talking about basically people in the community being able to see what police force is being used, or police equipment is being used, to better understand how to operate when it comes to police force. Okay, so the basis behind this ability to visualize the military police force or equipment comes from Assembly Bill 481, which requires California law enforcement agencies to post military equipment inventories online. And it reads, the legislation finds and declares all of the following. A, the acquisition of military equipment and its deployment in our community adversely impacts the public safety and welfare, including the increased risk of civilian deaths, significant risks to civil rights, civil liberties, and physical and psychological well-being, and the incurment of significant financial costs. Military equipment is more frequently deployed in low-income Black and Brown communities, meaning the risks and impacts of police militarization are experienced most acutely in marginalized communities. B, the public has a right to know about any funding, acquisition, or use of military equipment by state or local government officials, as well as the right to participate in any government agency's decision to fund, acquire, or use such equipment. C, decisions regarding whether and how military equipment is funded, acquired, or used should give strong consideration to the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties, and should be based on meaningful public input. D, legally enforceable safeguards, including transparency, oversight, and accountability measures must be in place to protect the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties before military equipment is funded, acquired, or used. E, the lack of public forum to discuss the acquisition of military equipment jeopardizes the relationship police have with the community, which can undermine when law enforcement is seen as an occupying force rather than a public safety service. Okay, so here I have two different inventories listed on the screen just to show the lack of standardization between the inventories. Within the Assembly Bill, there is no regulation regarding how the information is to be presented, more so that the information simply must be presented. So on the left, we have the inventory listing from the Chino Police Department. On the right, we have the inventory listing, or an example inventory listing from the Ventura County Police Department. And in the Chino inventory on the left, you can see that the information is listed by category of the equipment, followed by bullet points of all the equipment that they have. Followed by bullet points of all the equipment that they have under that specific category, and all of the information regarding these specific items in that particular bullet point. For example, fiscal impact or description of what that item is. However, when you go to the right and see the Ventura inventory, they also list the category of the equipment first, but then the list of the general information, as you can see, like toward the bottom, information getting to the details regarding the specifics of that category. So they're listed differently, but they present the same information, just listed differently, which makes it a little bit difficult when we're trying to gather all this information, make it uniform. And there's also a lot of discrepancies between how different departments reported the fiscal impact of each item within their inventories when it comes to things like ammunition, where things might be charged per round rather than per box that it comes in and things like that. So then it becomes a matter of trying to standardize how that works out. For this, we are working in partnership with the American Friends Service Committee to collate data about this equipment. Our goal is to demystify the equipment and help community members and lawmakers better understand what this equipment is and what it's used for. With our inventory list, we are trying to categorize the equipment in order to make the information more accessible and easily understandable to the common person.
Thank you. Now Tracy.
Hi, everybody. I'll be talking about how we took the data that Mahogany talked about and are kind of figuring out how to visualize it and just display it for everybody to see. So basically, one of the first steps after collecting all of this data was that we took this, we built this mock-up in Figma of what we wanted it to look like. So some things that we included were like a map view for users to like filter and select specific law enforcement agencies, because we wanted this to be accessible to California citizens who wanted to know what their local law enforcement agencies had as a military equipment inventory and like where their money was being put towards. And besides that, we also have this gallery view of military equipment inventory, because I remember when I was first introduced to this project, I was really surprised and shocked by like all the sorts of military equipment that these law enforcement agencies had. So we thought it would be a good idea to help citizens kind of visually understand like what exactly these law enforcement agencies have through this like gallery view, where they can then click on these pictures to not only like visualize but see like different details, costs, the company, and like other information like that. And then we also added this little part of the wireframe that will allow users to kind of put in like their location and then find the local law enforcement agencies in their area, and then have the military equipment inventory of those like specific local ones shown, so that way they can see what like military equipment is in like their areas. So then we moved on to building this prototype. Before we did that, though, we had a lot of like discussions about how we could possibly engage more people when we're displaying like all of this military equipment inventory data, we initially thought of doing a mobile app. But with the mobile app, like what I learned is that you need to be creating something that people will consistently come back to instead of something that's more of a one-use thing where you like, download the app and then you like never use it again after just looking at it one time. So we thought that for the platform to be more effective, we could do a web application. That way, whenever people want to kind of like check out what their local law enforcement agencies have, then they can just like reference that. So what we did was we built this prototype in Streamlit where we took the data set that everybody kind of worked on and collaborated on and put in the law enforcement agencies on 2 points in the map. And we also took California and separated it by county. And I'm gonna go ahead and
Uh-oh. Oh, that might be because it's on Will's computer. We can share, we'll have to share a link to it. I'm so sorry, that's. Can you sign? Oh, it's because it's a GitHub.
Okay, do you want me to sign in right now or just show?
Why don't we wait and show it afterwards or go here? You can describe it from the slide. Sorry about that, Tracy. You can just you can see the tab at the top. No, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so basically what we did was we have this map, and then if you click on a point with these red points all represent different law enforcement agencies. It'll give you information that I've collected on the name of that law enforcement agency, like where it's located, a link to the website for that, and its policy manual, and like its equipment policy. And we also have included like this gallery view where you can filter through different military equipment categories like drones, robots, etc., and search up specific equipment names. And one thing that we wanted to share was that this is still like an ongoing project. So we would love to hear any like feedback or ideas that you guys have. That way we can just kind of figure out how to best represent the data.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And I'm so sorry that that didn't work because Tracy did a tremendous job getting this thing up and running. We'll send the link out. And Sylvia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia. And today I'll be talking about, well, I'm going to start with a quote from Julia Lightfoot-Hims. If you don't know, she's a member of the City Council of Palo Alto. She's also former, like, I think she was the dean of freshman and undergraduate at Stanford. That's crazy. And basically, can a data story help humanize harm? We need to present the data so that it is not just cold, dead statistics, but instead tells a story that humanizes the harm and shows the injury of racism. Now, what does that mean? Basically, I want to start by saying that how do you switch again? Oh, okay. Yeah. So this project that I'm going to be talking about today started as a data project emerging from the Say Their Names, No More Names exhibit. Essentially, we gathered records of all Black people killed by police in California and created wiki data entries for them. When deciding what data to capture, we found significant variations in what data was collected and noted in the entries. For many, we could find very little biographical information on who they were and on their lives, only that they were killed by the police. This sparsity of data indicated that all of these people, along with what they did, who they were, who they loved, what they stood for, was only being represented by who they were killed by, what they were killed by. We became very frustrated with recording lives based off only how they were killed. And this resulted in a shift on focusing on one prominent person in
that was killed by police. But before I continue, I just want to show this as a visualization using a tool by Sesta. Basically, if you see all of this, these are like Wikidata entries. And like this space right here just shows like the discrepancies in the data. And shows that it's really hard to gather information on people when everyone, like when people just take like a quantitative approach to understanding people and their lives and who they were. And yeah, this is more like probably intricately understood by Nicole, but yeah. Like I said, this resulted in a shift to focusing on one prominent person killed by police, which was Oscar Grant. His name is well known. A Hollywood film was made about him and his life and his death. But what is known about the deeper historical context of his life and death? We decided to focus on a data-rich and contextual presentation of Oscar Grant's life and death in the context of Alameda County. So this is the data story of Oscar Grant. Pass it over to you. Thank you.
So yeah, great presentation so far. And I think going back to that earlier flow of, wanting to ensure that this kind of data store isn't just, cold dead statistics, we want to bring life to understanding this data, because we kind of engaged with platforms that have shown us that data can be rich, it can be humanizing. And so that is why we decided to focus on the one individual, Oscar Grant, and give greater context to his home, which is in Alameda County, and the contextualization factors that have shaped his life as well as his death. So for us, systemic racism, it's more than just a general description of events. It is empirical. It can be learned through data. It can be told through data, which is what we've attempted to do today. And so we've discovered a really cool interactive platform that allows us to kind of layer historical data upon each other by collecting and presenting a lot of public open source data. So for example, this platform has allowed us here to show the story of redlining. So redlining is a discriminatory housing practice. In this particular case, happened in Alameda County, California. So redlining originated in the 1930s. It was a result of the homeowner loan corporation, locally known as like the Hulk, which created color-coded maps, as you can see here, which designed this kind of segregation of credit worthiness. So a lot of Black and brown communities, especially in the Oakland, Hayward areas, Alameda areas, were designed as low credit risk, meaning that there is a lot of organized abandonment, which is essentially kind of this blight of a lot of social infrastructure. So here we're able to overlay the redlining map on top of current existing mapping of Alameda County. And then what's great about this is, so here we're able to zone in. Right here, you'll see with this green dot, this green star is Palma Ceia Elementary School. That is where Oscar Grant attended elementary school in Hayward, California. Just right over, he went to Mount Eden High School. And as you can see here, right in this green is known as an opportunity zone. And what an opportunity zone is, it's like an economic development kind of designation that allows people to invest in distressed areas. So this was designed to say, hey, this is an economically disenfranchised area and has tax benefits to investors in addition to spurring economic growth in these areas. So you'll be able to see like just the zoning right over is where Oscar Grant, grew up in his early life. There's also a lot of lacking of data in contextualizing these opportunity zones. So it's very likely that some of these zones extend to the left, extend greater into Hayward County. A lot of the existing mapping is a lot more north because Hayward exists more in the south of the East Bay. And then, kind of going back to this map, it just shows you kind of this overlay of these were existing in the same areas. The legacy of redlining exists in opportunity zones, and now moving on exists in things like environmental racism. So here we are able to download information from the US Census. This kind of color arrangement shows the pollutant burden, which is basically the exposure to pollutants in this area. So as you can see in the top corner, Oakland, I highlighted, this is where Fruitville, the Fruitville BART station is, where Oscar Grant was killed. And then as you go back, this is, the same star is like right in the middle of these kind of redlining zones. And as you can see here, this is, where some of the highest exposures to pollutants are. This affects everyone on such a mass scale. This is the result of redlining, where a lot of factories and a lot of like plants were built in these areas because they were designed to not be creditworthy. And now we see the legacy of it, decades and decades later when Oscar Grant was born in 1987. And so as you can tell here, data is enriching. It isn't just cold, it isn't just hard. And so we kind of want to bring life to this. But something that I think is weaved throughout all of our presentations today is discussing about accessibility to the public. It's very easy for a lot of this information to stick in this ivory tower of academia and the ivory tower of research. And so we have really all got up and, pondering about ideas to make this super publicly accessible. And so we've decided to also work on a zine format. And so zines have a long history, have also really started in the Bay Area, actually. And the goal of it is really to just tell stories in really engaging ways. And so we've started working on a zine story that weaves this historical data that we've collected into this very interactable zine, and hoping to narrate it through the life of Oscar Grant. So, coming here, talking about maternal care outcomes for Black mothers, Black children are mostly born in hospitals. And so it's important to tell that story. And then going into early education, where, students spend their lives, and so on and so forth. So for us, the name of this project is the No Systemic Racism Project. And so these kinds of platforms really allows us to know the system.
I'm gonna, thank you so much, Jessica. I'm gonna come back to this and pass this on to Alex. And if we have time, we'll look at that. Sure, this is a pipe dream.
So hi everyone, my name is Alex, and today I'm really excited to share with you the part of the project that we've been working on over the last few months at my internship. So, well, first of all, the proposal of the project came from a class taught by Nicole, Alicia Rizum, and Claudia Engels, called Digital Traces, and it was taught in the winter quarter, in which the students used the Black Stanford exhibit to learn more about the history of Black activism and community building at Stanford. So the goal of this project was to create a conversational experience with the archives, making them more accessible to people that would be interested into learning more about this important part of Stanford history. So the idea was to develop a chatbot, and while we have amazing resources like we have ChatGPT that could fulfill this purpose, there is a concern that it might generate inaccurate and fabricated answers or responses without an origin. Its limitations, in a lot of cases, without indicating that it lacks the answer and just making it up. So to address this issue, the idea was a chatbot that only relies on the information that we have on the archives that we can control and we know it's true. Well, it's also worth noting that the chatbot is still powered by the GPT-3 technology, but it only uses it to process and generate responses based on the verified data that we provide. So right now, I would like to read this quote by Kenny Washington. Like, but in the Black community, we knew lots of students on their own, predominantly Black campuses, that were killed by cops trying to protest the issues at the time and trying to get people registered to vote and that sort of thing. So the issues for us at Stanford were exactly the same issues as they were nationally. It's really important to mention that this project was inspired by the work of an artist called Stephanie Dinkins, particularly her project, not only the one, which is an interactive, voice interactive chatbot that was trained with the data of the members of her family to tell multi-generational stories. Well, it's an experiment in making the multi-generational memory of the Black American family. So from the perspective of custom deep learning AI. So here's a photo of her work. It's really important to mention that, well, it's an amazing work because I think this project was started in 2018, and well, at that time we didn't have all the technologies and resources that we have. So here, I think we can try the application.
You could share that with, I mean, others can
Oh,
go open the
yeah,
app if you wanted to, yeah.
I think I can share in the chat.
It was just go.stanford.edu/KSR, so that's good. You,
Can I?
sorry, Tana, go ahead, you go ahead.
Oh,
I didn't mean to interrupt you, apologize.
oh, what was it? Next, I forget about that. Oh, I think.
That's okay, we can tell them afterwards.
Oh.
I apologize.
So, oh yeah, so. Yeah, some of the questions that we can ask to the chatbot are. Example.
You can just type that in too. And something else.
So we can ask about some personalities. We can ask with these are people that appears in the documents that we provided. If you tell us, it generates a response based on the information that we provided, and it even like show us the resource of that extract the part of the document where it comes from.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, would you mind reading it? Because there's a line running, it's just the screen, it's not,
Sorry, so
not your, it's a screen.
So in this case, it's Claire Drake was a prominent figure in promoting diversity and African American studies. He was a scholar who taught at Roosevelt University in Chicago and later at Stanford University. He had a good relationship with the president and was an instrumental in starting the African American Studies program at Stanford. He also knew many African scholars and students and introduced them to others. So also we can ask another question like, who was in the taking the mic event? So it tell us like what the people that were involved. In this case, Mary Bacon, Roy Heyman, Omo Will Satterwhite, and Kenny Washington, and still again provided the snippets, documents. So I think you guys can also try it on your own. I think well the link is on the slides, and I can also share it.
That's okay, it's just go to Stanford.
Go to
Oh, you got
that.
Yeah.
I go to that Stanford that you is hard. Well, the good thing is that you can just ask questions related to the project. If we ask another random thing, it will tell us that it cannot answer that question. So yeah, well, in conclusion, so the chatbot was designed to answer questions about the history of Black activism at Stanford, providing a unique perspective on the struggles and achievements of Black students and community members over the years. Thank you.
Hey. Anyone want to pose a question? To the chatbot, or just pose a question to any of the student presenters? Hopefully. Oops. Okay.
I just
Thank you for presenting all of your work. It's really cool to see you all collaborators on such an important project. I'm just like trying to piece together, so one aspect that I love about this project is how local it is. It makes everything more like gritty and more just like available in terms of the details. I'm thinking specifically about the Take Back the Mic event and the demands that were made at that time to get police on police off campus. You know, Santa Clara County and Stanford have been at odds in terms of police presence on campus for ages, and there was a certain amount of student activism in 2020 around the creation of the or what I'm understanding the initial point of that culminated in the KSR project. And I'm remembering at the time students referring back to the Take Back the Mic event, but also referencing the murder of Pedro Calderon by Stanford police in 2002. And pointing out that in 20 years later, the family had still not received any kind of reparation. I'm wondering in terms of like the infrastructure of your project right now, and how it's already lended to very like local storytelling and interventions. If you think that like a more minor story, so we learned about Oscar Grant, and it's a story that has been told many times in the American media, but a story that would be even more local and less presented. Do you think that your project in terms of capturing data would be able to make an intervention with regards to this story? And then lastly, when I say intervention, do any of you as individuals or as a collective imagine your project, your data project in this animation, you know, the zine, the chat box, all of these different modalities, do they ever culminate in an ask, like in an ask to Stanford or to Santa Clara County, since we are residents of Santa Clara County and a lot of us live on campus? Or do you see your collaboration ending at exposition? Yeah. So thank you again. And some ideas with a kind of a question at the end, but
Start us off. I think definitely intervention is definitely an utmost goal for me. Like at the end of this day, like kind of had I was talking about the ivory tower, like this is all in great, but if it stays within these slides, kind of what is the whole point? And so I think that's kind of one of our goals, was working with some of these external partner institutions like EFF, like the American Friends Frontier Service, because they also have larger pulls and are coming from other, you know, organizations and infrastructures. I know with the AFSC, for example, they were working with like San Francisco government, especially with the whole conversation of like killer robots and all of that kind of stuff. So us providing kind of our huge database on the military equipment policies and the SB 978 policies allowed them to say, hey, now we don't have to reinvent the wheel and, you know, log down labor with kind of sourcing those kind of things. We can get right to the ask. And so I think that we definitely could see ourselves to be working within that pipeline of partnering with other institutions to kind of like magnify our effect. And then like Tracy's project, for example, kind of working on, you know, understanding geographically where some of these like heavy military artillery is, like would also just help people make informed decisions about where they're moving. Like, of course, housing isn't something that's always by choice, but also creating those informed decisions about, you know, putting a zip code in and saying like, okay, like it's not just about, you know, this being a great zip code for my kids to go to school when this county is donating, not donating, but has like billions and billions of dollars worth of military artillery, most of which they're getting for free through like military exit programs. So definitely things that we're thinking about considering.
Intervention is definitely a goal, especially in terms of like in California, because the project is based in California. I think that like just in terms of what Mahogany was talking about, in terms of like standardization, like it's like little things like that to big things like de-arming the police, you know? And I think that there's like different levels of intervention. And meeting all the levels would be ideal, but I don't know, I don't trust California, or I don't trust government, frankly, but. And then in terms of your question on like if on selecting a more like niche person for the story. A lot of it was like. Who would know like about these people? Like I frankly didn't know about Pedro who was killed until you just mentioned it. And so it was like, how do you ask a question if no one knows who the person is, period? So I don't know, I'm kind of like conflicted on that because it's like, yes, like we should be more local and like help. I don't know, it's just like a really confusing thing to think about.
I guess it's not to say you should or should not. I think it's a story that lends itself, you know, Pedro Calderon was a resident of East Palo Alto and the history of Stanford. And I don't know if when we talk about Palo Alto, if we use the term redlining, but like, you know, so like, you know, the wealth influx of Stanford as a zip code unto itself, existing in Santa Clara County, and the environmental and housing discrimination that persists to this day in East Palo Alto. And yeah, I'm just wondering, so do you think that this infrastructure that you've set up would be able to tell a story of a more minor character, or would you have to go in and make like significant changes to the research project, the pipelines, the infrastructure that you have worked so hard to, you know, put together since 2020? Or does it, or is this telling the story, or do these stories need to already be data rich?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an answer, but I would say that the structure we have right now, it's probably gonna need to change person by person, because at least I remember before the Oscar Grant project that we focused on, we were working on like the Wikidata entries for people, and it's like there's so much discrepancies in data, like in terms of who's out there, like people killed by the police, like there's so much discrepancy within the person that you're searching up, like, oh, did they actually go to this elementary school? Is this actually where they went to high school, or did they actually, like, I don't know, it's just like different things. So I imagine it would change person by person, just because like you need to emphasize certain aspects of a person more. Like, for example, like Oscar Grant was killed at Fruitvale Station, but he also wanted to be a cop when he was little, you know, which is kind of like, I don't know. There's a lot to think about with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of texture to every story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for thinking through that with me.
Andrew, did you have a question?
I have 4 bundles of questions, but I will just start with the first one, and then if it gets quiet, I can go a bit more. The first one is just firms, because I'm not familiar with this project, the background, as I probably should be. What counts as quote unquote military equipment? I was kind of surprised to see drones, which when I hear military equipment in discourse, I'm thinking like big weapons kinds of things. But the like bomb diffusing robots worked and the drones worked. So in your research, like what have you found about that term, both in terms of like what it encompasses and then what it does in discourse?
For me, I think Leah and Akosia can probably speak more to this because they were the ones who kind of compiled like the categories of different types of military equipment. So when I like first joined this project and was introduced to it, I was also like, I felt the exact same way where I was like, I didn't know drones or like robots or all these like transportation like equipment was also considered as military equipment. Basically, I think there's like around 12 categories of like military equipment. And then they do include things like drones, which I think is used for like military operations like reconnaissance and like all those different sorts.
Yeah, Billy and I were working on a bulk of kind of transferring the like AB 41 text to kind of these entries. And so the AB 41 bill lists about 15 categories where they define what they are. So for example, like category 1 being like unmanned aerial vehicles, 2 being robots, forgetting 3 and 4. And then you start getting into categories like 12, which is like the less lethal launchers. And then we also start to really see kind of this homogeny of companies like Defense Technologies, Combined Technical Systems, DJI for category 1. We started seeing these patterns of, you know, billions and billions of dollars that these companies are producing. So they're, you know, specifically outlined by the proposition. However, we were seeing discrepancies and how each police department was interpreting them. So with category 1 and 2 being fairly similar with like unmanned aerial vehicle versus manned aerial vehicle, sometimes they would, you know, conflate kind of the categories. And, you know, as we mentioned in the presentation, sometimes it would seem super deliberate. Especially because there's something called the Military 1033 program, which is where a lot like these police departments aren't necessarily going out and buying you know, these military equipment. So they're not necessarily taking from tax spending dollars as much as it's coming from the military, them saying, hey, we don't use this equipment anymore. And so it's like a program where we're just going to donate it all. And so I think definitely these labeling of the categories is kind of a way in which, you know, some sneaky activities can happen.
I'm amazing the work you're doing and it's presenting all the different answers so well. And I'm thinking around myself the big questions of data and the larger context is now is everything data is the new oil. And I think it's so interesting that you have even in just what you presented, both very different type of data and with very different kind of history and how you engage with it, you know. So I was just now thinking like, you know, like the one where you showed the brevet with is the biographical data where you have been putting and finding out, but then more informations with research. But then in the case of the ones that the data set about the military that you were just describing, if I understand right, for example, I mean, there is just like the type of weapons, and then there is some categorizations, and you rearrange it, and then it would be great to have, for example, the data point, and I don't know if you have it or not, was this purchase or was this donation program, which is just like cognitive dissonance already there. But then there is also the data of the oral histories, you know. So I think it's also a great project to think about the problem that we have with data that goes from cold statistics and how you make it into something humane. And this is the longest history for centuries of data. But I wonder what you think, like given your experience in working with this, where did data become, like what's empowering about the data and the stories? And when is it that you could think with satisfaction yourself in the kind of story that you were able to tell? And is it about just opposing two different kind of data sets and see what happens when you put those together? And the question comes from the visualizations with the map that you can, but do you, how worried are you about using different kind of data set, how much you know about it or not, how much you curate, how much you present it to the public? So just taking the questions of data that you're so well positioned to take it. What would you be your statement after this experience about the data is called the statistics or data as something that can be empowering? And what do you think it means to give data to others to do their stories with?
Yeah, in response to that, I think that honestly, a lot of the data that we probably come across for me personally is disheartening the empowering. I'm one of the people that's like working primarily on the military inventories and just like seeing the amount of equipment that they have and the amount of money that they're able to spend on it is a little crazy that they just have so much at their reach to be able to use in such negative manners, because we've all like like we were saying earlier, like we've all had some points of contact with each of the realms that we spoke about today. So it's like I've seen the stories about like these people getting killed, and then now I have the information about how they're able to be killed so easily with all this military equipment. So it becomes like once you start to connect the dots, it becomes a little disheartening when you start to think about how these things all connect to one another and how they're so easily able to do so. I think that like gaining this knowledge, like we want to gain this knowledge to be able to give it to people so that people can feel empowered, to feel like they understand what is happening, to be able to, I guess, adjust their views on things, or just be able to feel like they have some information so they're not completely disarmed when things might happen to them. But in terms of, so that would be a point of empowerment. I guess I would say just like educating people so that they have that information to be able to utilize in the future, but like just in terms of doing the actual research, it's a bit opposite for me.
It's like kind of, I'm working with different data now, so it's like education data. I think it's kind of enlightening when you're wrong about something. Because like when I have like a hypothesis about like what to expect, and then the data tells me a different story, I'm like, oh, like that's interesting. I didn't realize like that was what the narrative is. And it just shows me that relationships are far more nuanced than I actually expect them to be. And that things are a lot more intricate and a lot more intertwined. And like, it's really hard to get to the bottom of everything. And just, I think I took a class with Sean Reardon, and I'm working as his research assistant now. And a lot of our data work is like going back into CETA and like using like looking at like redlining and segregation and how these things overlapped, and like how segregation like or desegregation affected like the transition of schools. And it's just like really intricate. And I have like certain hypotheses about like what to expect, and then we find something completely different, and then it's just like really interesting to me. But like Mahogany was saying, like when I was working on stuff with the COSIA in terms of like military equipment, yeah, it's kind of scary.
This is just a small suggestion related to the chatbot. I've played with it a little bit. It's very, very cool. Very impressed with the stuff that you've been able to do with that in particular. But I would just suggest taking it one step further when you have all these source documents, which I think is such an excellent feature, because then you see, you know, precisely what this is pulling from. There could be an attribution, like how you actually find that source, or like even a document title so that you can search that within the Stanford archives. I think that would make this a million times more useful to people who are trying to, you know, write papers using this material, for example.
Can you respond to that? Okay.
Actually, ready for this presentation, Nico, I had to improve that right now. Yeah, this was like a small prototype. We are still planning on working on it. Yeah, you're right, yes. Actually, we thought about that. Hopefully, we'll be able.
Yeah, I think that'll be great.
Yeah, it's actually right now it's just like I think right now the source is just like even it's not real, because first when I was deploying the application, it was in my computer, so now the source that is showing is like my local source.
Oh, yeah, I see that there's a source attribution, but it's essentially meaningless to anyone else. So it seems like it would be an easy enough fix to just go in, and even if you could link to, you know, the Stanford Library citation of what that is, like that would be huge for, right? So
You can actually link to the actual document, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a URL for each one. of these
Wonderful.
things. Yeah.
One thing I'm thinking about with the showing the human harm, or like in this project, is like often when you read like a Wikipedia entry about an incident like this, it'll swap between like focalization of a scene, like from a police officer, and then like to the victim, and then often the police officer account, like it's false, and it's kind of based on some lie that's made up, like that they thought the person had a weapon seems to be a really common one, like a pattern that I've noticed. And then it's like later they've been proven to be unarmed. And that seems to be like a deliberate strategy to get lower sentencing. And it seems to be something that people are trained into, like say something at the time that kind of indicates that, or like saying that they fired a warning shot, or like that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, like in your when I read through these, my experience as a reader, not knowing like anything about it beforehand, is that it kind of makes me confused. And it makes me think, oh, maybe something was done that like could have justified some action, not the action that happened, but like it just kind of confuses things in my mind. And I guess maybe that's because part of the data sources for this type of project would be from police reports, right? Like, is there any way that you can display things without, like, if something later gets proven to be false, can you like take it out? Or is that messing with the data too much? Or like, is there a way that you could only present it focalized through the victim's perspective without showing the police perspective? Because I don't know, it's sort of like, it makes it harder for me to understand what's going on when I see those types of like statements that show up on these Wikipedia articles. I don't know. I know you want to like preserve data and be truthful and accurate. And I know it's a complicated story and it's not always like a simple situation. So yeah, I don't know. You've been sitting in this project for a lot longer. So yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Maybe I could say something about that, in response to, things that Felicia has said. So the example you gave of, police reports, we haven't actually captured police reports.
We haven't, okay.
But the big local data, big local team in communication has absolutely been working on police reports. So we're sort of trying to be complementary. They're another one of our sometime partners and working with the Knight Fellowship, or Knight Fellows. Because journalism, does kind of, fit closely with this. But one of the things, that like Felicia has mentioned several times, how the police report for Breonna Taylor says, I'm gonna mistake this, but to paraphrase, no one was harmed, right? Like she was uninjured, but of course she was shot and killed, and it's just the way that these things can be written, right? And the way that they can be contextualized. So I think if we don't have that, then we don't have that context. If we don't have that, to present alternatives to. And I think this comes back to something that I think it was Leah was saying, there's a lot, right? There's a lot of data. There's only so much we can do. There's only so much we can say. We can, approach this from certain perspectives. And what we're trying to do in part is, knowing that this is like, the remit of this project is just like massive, right? So where do you start and how do you start to think differently about collecting data? When we started to use Wikidata or, create Wikidata entries, it was a way of saying, we know this is going to go on and on and on. And how do we engage with a larger community? And also, how do we learn to let go a little bit, of the control, but reach a bit beyond Stanford and what we can hold within Stanford Library. And that's different than what libraries typically do. The library practice, particularly with the policy manuals that Disha isn't here, unfortunately, to speak about, would be to collect those PDFs, collect the metadata, ingest them and put them into our digital repository. But the challenge there is then how do people actually engage with them? Getting to what Akosia was saying, like the average person, are they going to go log in and read these policy manuals? How might we be able to apply something like what Alex has done to policy manuals? So we can apply it to okay.
What happens if you switch like the visualization not for the nodes to be like the person's murdered, but the like murdering agent? So like SFPD, I see it at least twice. Like, what do those clusters look like, and what happens to your project if you start calling it a project on policing?
Felicia says it's not a police project.
And why, and do you agree?
Yeah, I think that if the basis of the project is the Say No Names, No More Names project, then I kind of think it would be like, I don't know if like harmful is the right word to call it, but it would just be a little weird for us to then base it on the police. Like, it's about the police and what they do, but we really want to make it about the people. Like, I feel like as you were speaking about earlier, like a lot of the narrative is put on the police and like they get to have their say first. And like these people are injured or they're dead or they're from marginalized communities, they never get their voice heard. So I think that a lot of the basis of this project is allowing these people to have their voices heard and like giving them a project where it's through their lens and where they have like the priority rather than the police. So I feel like it would probably shift the project greatly if we were to switch that and like make it a police focused project. Whereas like that's not necessarily the goal, I guess.
That was like Oscar Grant, for example, like died at like 22 years old. So that means that there's 22 years of like data that we would be completely omitting if we just talk about that last year, that last day of his life. Like, you know, something that like Blee and I were super excited to work on was like educational data. I've been really passionate about environmental racism. All those things are occurring like, you know, potentially in the first like 10 years of life. And we would definitely be omitting a huge contextual part of the story by just focusing on that 22nd year.
Thank you.
One of the things, if I could just take 1 minute to show, because we don't really have time, but one of the ways in which I think this, I mean, you know, take your point, Chloe, and this is something that we definitely talked about a lot. And we started, you know, with this problem as, you know, Philia mentioned that defining people by their death was really painful and problematic for us. You know, at the same time, that's what we had. That's one of the data sets we had. We started, but we also put this data into a knowledge graph, and we started to make connections, not only between people's, you know, death, but you know, things that are not as easily reported. Like these nodes are protests, right? So, you know, Oscar Grant's mother in particular was very, very active and continues to be, and you can see through the data, the ways in which, you know, the protests, and then in this, you know, very, very small sample data set, you know, sort of starting with Oscar Grant, do end up influencing legislation such that, you know, when SB 1421 was the Right to Know Act, you know, was passed in 2018, that meant that when Stephon Clark was killed, I mean, you know, Stephon Clark was still killed for no reason, but at least when that happened, immediately all of the materials had to be released. It was a requirement. It was a policy requirement, right? And so this is something that's making a change. And then you can kind of come full circle from there. There's a bunch of other laws related to that, and it's a bigger story. But basically, you know, Oscar Grant, the shooting report, there's been reinvestigation, and the current Attorney General of California has just recently reopened the investigation into Perone's involvement in Oscar Grant shooting. And that's, again, it's a result of all of these different activity, all of this additional legislation. You sort of start to see this sort of bigger picture and how these pieces do make a difference. And that's why, you know, we started to get involved in, you know, the work that that Mahogany and Tracy presented today. It has a direct impact because our friends at EFF or American Defense Service Committee, they want to be able to go to the legislators and say, look at what this equipment is, you know. And I'm sorry that we only show the drones really in the pictures, because if you got to see Tracy's app, you'd see that there's a lot more, right? It's like heavy military equipment. And it's frightening, but it helps like them to understand and be able to communicate this to others. And then, you know, make an impact, that, you know, laws do change things, not quickly enough, of course, but it's making a difference. Anyway, I'm so proud of all of the work that all of the students have done. And again, thanks SESTA for helping us with this, and Felicia, I hope Felicia's still there. And thanks to Disha, who wasn't able to be here, but